A small village's fate was once sealed by its weakest wall. This video reveals 15 defensive architecture systems that transformed vulnerable settlements into regional powers. By the end, you will understand the exact blueprint of stones and strategy that can turn fear into unshakable dominion. How did a city protected by water become the heart of an empire? What secret allowed a wooden fort to conquer an entire kingdom? These structures were never just barriers. They became engines of wealth, stages for authority, and cradles for culture that defined civilizations. Each design is a masterclass in turning peril into permanence. What does true security actually look like when it is built to last for centuries? That first intentional wall changed everything. It was not just a pile of rocks or a line of stakes. It was a declaration. A community was no longer simply occupying a space. It was defining one, proclaiming that everything inside this line belonged to a shared idea of order and safety. This psychological shift is where true power begins to crystallize. Before grand empires and legendary citadels, there was the fundamental realization that security could be built, planned for, and invested in. Early settlements naturally sought what the land offered for protection: a high place to see danger coming, a river bend to serve as a moat, a thick forest to obscure an approach. But these were passive advantages. The transformative moment arrived when people decided to enhance what nature provided, to dig that river bend deeper into a deliberate ditch, to pile stones upon that hilltop to form a rampart. This move from opportunistic location to intentional construction required something revolutionary: organized collective labor. It meant that the community's time and energy, resources that could have been spent hunting or farming, were instead dedicated to a project whose sole purpose was a future possibility: defense. This investment in a shared future is perhaps the first and most profound act of civic engineering. The materials evolved, of course, from packed earth and timber to shaped stone bound with early forms of mortar, but the core innovation was social. A wall required planners to design it, leaders to organize the workforce, and guards to patrol it. It created new roles and hierarchies. Inside this newly secured space, a different kind of life became possible. The constant, draining anxiety of a night raid could lessen. Stored grain was safer from theft. Craftspeople could specialize in trades beyond basic survival, knowing their tools and workshops were protected. A marketplace could become a permanent feature, not a temporary gathering. This secure enclosure became a crucible for law, for commerce, for a unique identity. People stopped being just a collection of families on a hill. They became the people of the walled town. Their security, once a fleeting hope, was now literally set in stone, forming the unshakable foundation upon which every regional power we will explore was ultimately built. The story of defensive architecture, therefore, is not merely a tale of military engineering. It is the story of how the human desire for safety built the first classrooms for civilization itself. Those first walls were a statement of intent, but the first true architectural symphony of defense arose from the hills of ancient Greece. Rising from a sun-baked landscape, the Cyclopean walls of Mycenae stand as a testament to a civilization that understood security as the ultimate form of political theater. Later Greeks, gazing upon these ruins, could not fathom human hands moving such colossal, irregular blocks of limestone. They attributed the work to the Cyclopes, the mythical one-eyed giants, a name that has endured for millennia. This was not merely a fortification. It was a calculated illusion of divine or superhuman origin, a psychological weapon built directly into the landscape. The genius of this system lay in its brutal harmony with the land itself. The builders did not flatten the hilltop to suit their design. Instead, they allowed the massive, uncut stones to follow the natural contours of the ridge. This eliminated vulnerable blind spots where attackers could gather unseen, forcing any approaching force to traverse steep, exposed slopes under the gaze of defenders above. The wall was not an object placed upon the hill, it became an extension of the hill's own formidable presence, and at its heart stood the Lion Gate, the sole grand entrance. Its threshold was capped by a single immense lintel stone weighing over 20 tons, above which a triangular slab of carved relief depicted two lionesses flanking a central pillar. This was the masterpiece of the entire system. Functionally, the triangle diverted the crushing weight of the masonry above away from the lintel, a brilliant piece of architectural stress relief. Symbolically, it broadcast a dual message to all who approached: raw, intimidating power, and a sophisticated, artistic culture worthy of respect and fear. Within this shell of seemingly impregnable stone, Mycenae did not just survive, it thrived. Historians point to the secure storage of vast wealth, treasures of gold, amber, and bronze gathered from extensive trade networks across the Mediterranean. This accumulated capital, safe behind those giant-built walls, provided the fuel for ambition. It funded the creation of a professional military, it financed diplomatic ventures, and it bankrolled the expeditions that extended Mycenaean influence across the Aegean. The psychological impact on the inhabitants was profound. To live, trade, and govern within such a space fostered a collective identity of chosen strength, a belief in their own invincibility that propelled them from a fortified settlement to the nerve center of a civilization. The Cyclopean walls were more than a barrier, they were the foundational stone of an empire, proving that when defense is engineered on a mythic scale, it creates not just safety but a destiny. Yet even the mightiest stone walls must one day face the ultimate test of time and tide. While Mycenae commanded the hills, another empire would rise by mastering a far more fluid and deceptive frontier, the sea. The Phoenicians, a civilization born from the thin coastal strip of the eastern Mediterranean, faced a paradox. Their wealth came from the water, through a network of trade that stretched from the Levant to the Atlantic. But that same water made their home cities like Tyre and Sidon perpetually vulnerable, accessible to any rival with a fleet. Their solution was not to retreat from the sea, but to redefine it. They pioneered the concept of the artificial island fortress. The most legendary of these was the city of Tyre, originally built on a coastal island a short distance from the mainland. The Phoenicians did not stop there. They expanded the island's footprint with meticulous land reclamation, creating a larger, more defensible base. But the true stroke of genius was the construction of not one, but two harbors, one facing north and one facing south, each enclosed within massive seawalls. This dual harbor system was a masterclass in defensive economics. It meant that no matter the wind direction or the origin of a naval threat, Tyrian ships could always sail out to engage or, crucially, sail in with their cargoes protected. Trade never had to stop for a siege. The harbors themselves were feats of hydraulic engineering, with submerged gates and complex foundations that stabilized the water and prevented silting, ensuring they remained operational for centuries. The walls surrounding the city were said to rise 150 feet directly from the sea, presenting a sheer, slick face to any ship that dared approach. For an attacker, the logistical nightmare was absolute. A land army was useless, separated by a channel of water. A naval assault meant approaching those towering walls under a hail of projectiles from above, with no beachhead to regroup. The only option was a long, desperate, and costly blockade, which the city's stockpiles and ongoing clandestine sea trade could often outlast. This architectural defiance transformed Tyre from a vulnerable coastal town into an unconquerable bank vault in the sea. The security it offered allowed the Phoenicians to take colossal commercial risks, sending their famous purple-dyed cloth, cedar wood, and glass across the Mediterranean. Their alphabet, their maritime innovations, their very identity as a culture of connectors, all flourished within the safety of those harbor walls. They proved that the greatest defense could be a gateway, that by controlling the point of entry, you could control the flow of wealth and ideas across the known world. Their legacy was not a vast inland empire, but a web of influence, and it was built not on keeping the world out, but on expertly managing how it came in. But a wall that merely bars a door can also become a cage. The Phoenicians mastered the sea as a moat, yet on the vast, wind-swept plains of another continent, an empire faced a threat that could not be contained by water, a frontier that bled across the land itself. The early Great Wall systems of the Qin and Han dynasties were an answer to this existential puzzle, not as a single, unbroken ribbon of stone, but as something far more profound, a vast, breathing organism of defense stretched across the northern limits of China. This was architecture conceived on the scale of geography itself, a project of such staggering logistical ambition it sought to transform an entire vulnerable frontier into a springboard for civilization. The genius was in its integrated system. It was never just a wall. It was a rammed earth and stone spine, reinforced with watchtowers that functioned as optical telegraphs, relaying signals of smoke by day and fire by night across hundreds of miles in a matter of hours. It was a chain of garrison forts stocked with grain and arms that served as forward operating bases. This network turned a static barrier into a dynamic membrane. It allowed a centralized power in the distant capital to sense a disturbance on its periphery and project military force to that exact point with unprecedented speed. The wall did not just keep nomadic groups out, it actively secured the lifelines of wealth within. Historians note that by pacifying the northern routes, the Han dynasty safeguarded the early Silk Road. Caravans laden with silk, spices, and ideas could move with less fear of raid or disruption. The taxes and wealth from this protected commerce flowed back to the heartland, funding not more war, but an explosion of internal development, scholarship, and cultural unification. The wall created a clear, defensible concept of inside. Within this secured space, a unified Chinese identity, with its standardized writing, laws, and measurements, could take root and flourish without the constant drain of border conflict. It was the ultimate statement of sedentary, agrarian power against the volatility of the steppe. The Han dynasty did not just build a wall, they built the operating system for a regional superpower, using architecture to define the very space where a civilization could grow safe, rich, and influential for centuries. This monumental effort to draw a line on a map leads us to wonder, what happens when the geography itself refuses to offer a clear line to defend? When your nation is not a continent with a frontier, but a solitary rock surrounded by an endless, encroaching sea. The vast, silent line of the Great Wall was a statement of absolute territorial control. But what happens when you're not defending a frontier of your own, but living as an island of foreign power within a vast and hostile sea? This was the impossible reality for the Crusader states, European outposts clinging to the coast of the Levant. Surrounded on all sides, perpetually outnumbered, their survival depended on an architectural innovation of chilling efficiency, the concentric castle. This was not a single wall, but a lesson in lethal geometry carved in stone. At places like the legendary Crac des Chevaliers, the design was a series of ever higher, ever more formidable rings. An attacking force that somehow scaled the first outer curtain wall would not find a path to victory but a nightmare. They would drop into a narrow, exposed corridor, a killing ground completely encircled by the even taller inner wall. From that higher ring, defenders could rain down arrows, stones, and boiling liquids onto the trapped invaders below, who had no cover and nowhere to retreat. This system multiplied defensive firepower, allowing a surprisingly small garrison of knights and soldiers to hold off armies many times their size. But the concentric castle was far more than a military machine. Its sheer, daunting presence on a hilltop was a constant psychological campaign, a symbol of unshakable Frankish resolve that demoralized potential challengers for miles around. This security allowed it to become the beating heart of a small but potent regional power. Historians note that these fortresses were strategically placed to command vital caravan routes and pilgrimage roads. From their secure gates, Crusader lords could levy tolls on passing trade, generating a steady flow of wealth independent of vulnerable farmland. They served as administrative centers, courts, and treasuries, governing the surrounding territory through the sheer gravitational pull of their security. The concentric castle transformed a vulnerable coastal enclave into a self-sustaining node of political and economic control, proving that in a contested land, the most formidable fortress could also be a capital city, a bank, and a throne. But stone and concentric rings are born from a specific world of quarries and timber. On the opposite edge of the Sahara, where the sun bleaches the earth and stone is a distant luxury, an empire's strength rose not from what it could carve, but from what it could mold. The Sudano-Sahelian empires of West Africa, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai faced a dual threat: the shifting sands of the desert and the raiders who moved across them like shadows. Their answer was an architecture of profound adaptation, transforming the very ground beneath their feet into a system of defense and identity. They built with banko, a mixture of sun-baked mud, bricks, and earth, reinforced with a skeletal grid of protruding wooden beams called toran. This was not primitive construction, it was a sophisticated, climate-intelligent technology. The massive earthen walls of cities like Timbuktu and the iconic, soaring forms of the Great Mosque of Djenné were formidable by their very nature. Their immense thickness and height presented a daunting barrier, while the toran beams served a dual purpose, acting as permanent scaffolding for the annual replastering rituals and creating a surface that was impossible for climbing ropes or ladders to gain purchase on. Narrow, labyrinthine entrances controlled and funneled any potential intruder into easily defended choke points. This was a fortress that breathed with the seasons, maintained by the entire community in a cycle of renewal that reinforced social cohesion. The genius of this system was how it secured prosperity. Historians point to these fortified urban centers as the secure southern terminals of the trans-Saharan trade routes. Caravans laden with gold from the south, salt from the desert, and ivory from the interior would complete their perilous journeys at these gates. Within the safety of the walls, the empires could tax this wealth, accumulating legendary riches that fueled their courts and their ambitions. The security was not just physical, it was intellectual. Timbuktu, protected by its earthen ramparts, became a global center of Islamic scholarship and commerce. Its famous Angkor University attracting thinkers and its libraries safeguarding knowledge. The walls did not just keep danger out, they created a sanctuary where wealth and wisdom could pool and flourish, proving that a regional power could be built from the soil itself, an elegant testament to building not against your environment, but profoundly with it. This theme of brilliant adaptation to an unforgiving landscape would find a startling parallel in a world of a different kind of density, where the greatest threat was not the open desert, but the impenetrable jungle. The dense jungle presents a paradox, offering both concealment and starvation for any large settlement. Yet in the heart of Southeast Asia, the Khmer Empire solved this riddle not by fighting the environment, but by orchestrating it on a divine scale. At Angkor, they built a defensive system where water itself became both shield and sword. The city's vast square moat and imposing laterite wall were only the most visible elements. The true innovation lay beneath and around them, a sprawling, intelligent network of reservoirs called barrays and interlinking canals that transformed the entire landscape. This was not mere fortification, it was geoengineering for survival and dominance. The system served a brilliant dual purpose. In times of peace, the barrays captured and stored monsoon rainwater, feeding a reliable irrigation network that turned the volatile jungle into predictable, fertile rice paddies capable of supporting a population historians estimate in the hundreds of thousands. This agricultural surplus was the bedrock of power, but in times of conflict, the same water became a weapon. The canals were not random, they were designed as strategic obstacles, channeling and slowing any invading army through a confusing, waterlogged maze, breaking their formations and exposing them to defenders. Most critically, the reservoirs guaranteed the city could withstand a long siege while the attackers outside its walls would struggle to find fresh water in the captured, diverted countryside. Archaeologists point to this hydraulic security as the engine of Khmer expansion. A well-fed, secure population provided both the massive labor force to build celestial monuments like Angkor Wat and the large professional armies needed to project power. The kings of Angkor did not just rule a city, they commanded a hydrological machine. Their authority flowed with the water, securing their core and enabling a regional influence that blended military might with profound religious and cultural persuasion. They demonstrated that the ultimate defensive weapon could be the mastery of a fundamental resource, turning the jungle's greatest threat, water, into the source of its greatest empire. The jungle's hydraulic mastery was a form of power written in water and stone, but a new technology would soon arrive that could shatter both with thunderous force. Gunpowder artillery changed the rules of security overnight, turning the proud, vertical walls of medieval castles into towering liabilities. A single cannonball could collapse a gatehouse. A sustained bombardment could reduce a mighty curtain wall to rubble. For vulnerable cities across Europe, this was an existential crisis, their very survival now measured in the thickness of their defenses. The response was an architectural revolution so complete it redrew the map of power, the Bastion fort, also known as the Trace Italian. This was not a taller wall, it was a smarter one, an entire landscape of defense engineered to absorb and answer the power of the cannon. The old high walls were abandoned in favor of low, massively thick ramparts, often packed with earth behind a stone facade to swallow the impact of solid shot. But the true genius was the angular, arrowhead-shaped projection known as the Bastion. These were not mere towers, they were interlocking platforms of lethal geometry. Each bastion was positioned so that its sides could provide covering fire for the wall face of its neighbor, creating overlapping fields of musket and cannon fire that swept every inch of ground before the walls. An attacking army now faced a deadly puzzle where every approach was exposed to fire from multiple directions, making a traditional infantry assault a near-certain loss of life. Military engineers like Sébastien Leprestre de Vauban in France perfected this system into vast, star-shaped complexes of ditches, outworks, and glacis slopes, turning a siege into a prolonged, grinding mathematical equation heavily weighted toward the defender. This radical new security had a profound political effect. A city protected by a bastion fort became something far more valuable than a refuge. It became a resilient, trustworthy node for the emerging nation-state. Within these geometric walls, royal authority could establish permanent administrative offices, secure tax revenues, and set up state-controlled arms manufactories, all safe from the sudden raids or rebellions that had once crippled centralized power. The Bastion did not just defend a city, it anchored the bureaucracy of a kingdom, and this model became the ultimate tool of imperial export. As European powers expanded across oceans, they planted these star-shaped forts on foreign shores from the Caribbean to India. Each one was a secure foothold, a depot for trade goods, a barracks for troops, and a stark symbol of technological dominance that could pacify vast territories with a relatively small garrison. The Bastion fort system demonstrates, perhaps more clearly than any other, how a purely defensive adaptation to a new weapon did not just preserve the status quo. It actively enabled a new age of centralized regional power and global empire, proving that the shape of security dictates the shape of sovereignty itself. The bastion's geometry was a declaration of human logic imposed upon the land, but some defensive systems emerge from a more profound conversation with the earth itself. Across the vast Pacific, on the volcanic islands of Hawaii, a different kind of fortress was born, one that understood security not as a permanent barrier, but as a sacred rhythm of life and retreat. This was the Paʻu system, a network of fortified refuges that transformed vulnerable coastal communities into the foundation of a unified kingdom. Unlike the walled cities of Europe or Asia, a Paʻu was not a continuously inhabited town. It was a sanctuary, a place of last resort deliberately placed in locations of breathtaking natural defense, on knife-edge ridgelines atop sheer sea cliffs, or on isolated headlands connected to the mainland only by a narrow, easily defended path. These sites were enhanced with stacked stone walls, wooden palisades, and terraced fighting platforms, but their primary strength was the land's own formidable character. In times of conflict or raid, the entire population of a district could retreat upslope, taking their most vital possessions and food stores into these virtual island fortresses in the sky. A besieging force faced a grueling climb up exposed slopes only to meet a fortified line at the top, a tactical nightmare that made conquest incredibly costly. Yet the true genius of the system lay in its coupling with the sea. A chief's power was not measured by the Paʻu alone, but by his control of the sheltered bays and canoe landings below, the vital gateways for fishing, trade, and communication. This created a dynamic balance of power. The Paʻu secured the people, the lifeblood of the community, while control of the coastline secured the resources and connections. Historians of Polynesia point out that this architecture directly shaped political ascent. A chief who secured multiple Paʻu within a territory, along with the fertile taro fields and fishing grounds that fed them, could protect a larger population and command greater loyalty. This allowed for the consolidation of power on individual islands, as rival chiefs were either absorbed or subdued. The Paʻu system proved that centralized control could emerge from a network of decentralized, terrain-specific refuges. It was a defensive strategy that worked with the island's vertical geography, turning steep cliffs and isolated peaks into the stepping stones of regional dominance, a quiet testament to how understanding a landscape's natural defenses can forge not just safety, but a nation. The vertical sanctuaries of the Pacific were a fortress of retreat, but in the sun-scorched valleys of the Maghreb, survival demanded a different kind of stronghold, one built not for escape but for endurance. Here, the Berber communities confronted a landscape of scarcity, where the true enemy was not just a rival tribe, but the relentless, looming specter of famine. Their architectural answer was the Ksar, a structure of such profound communal logic it turned a collection of vulnerable families into an unbreakable economic citadel. These were not castles for kings, but collective fortresses for grain, rising from the earth in multi-storied, honeycombed clusters of small, identical rooms. Built directly into hillsides or atop rocky outcrops, their outward face was a sheer, windowless wall of rammed earth and stone, presenting a blank, impassive stare to the desert. All life and access funneled through a single, massive gate, a bottleneck that could be defended by a handful of determined individuals. The genius was in its purpose. Each of those dozens of tiny rooms belonged to a different family, serving as a secure vault for their most precious possession, the season's harvest of barley, dates, and wheat. By centralizing and fortifying the food supply, the Ksar eliminated the most crippling vulnerability of a scattered settlement. A rival force could raid a few outlying homes, but it could not starve out the community, which held years of sustenance behind those monolithic walls. This guaranteed food security reshaped every aspect of life. Anthropologists note that with their survival assured, these communities could engage in long-distance trans-Saharan trade with newfound confidence. Caravans carrying salt, gold, and cloth could depart, knowing their families and the wealth of their harvests were safe back at the Ksar. This economic stability became political power. Control of a Ksar often meant control of the local oasis, the vital watering hole on a trade route. The community could levy taxes on passing caravans, providing another stream of wealth that reinforced their autonomy. The Ksar was more than a granary, it was a social contract set in mud brick, a declaration that collective security was the foundation of individual prosperity. It allowed Berber tribes to negotiate from a position of unshakable strength with larger empires, preserving their culture and autonomy for centuries by mastering the simple, profound equation that whoever controls the food controls the future. This focus on securing the fundamental resource of sustenance finds a startling parallel in a very different environment, where the greatest threat came not from the emptiness of the desert, but from the overwhelming, crushing pressure of the deep. While the Ksar secured survival in the desert silence, a different kind of order was being carved from the volcanic mountains and dense forests of a group of islands emerging from civil war. Following generations of relentless conflict known as the Sengoku period, the domains of feudal Japan faced a paradox: how to transform a landscape of vulnerable, warring manners into stable, enduring states. The answer was not found in a single fortress, but in an entire ecosystem of power, a perfectly integrated system of defense, administration, and social controls centered on the mountain castle, or shiro, and its meticulously planned castle town, the Jokamachi. This was architecture as a total operating system for a feudal lord, a daimyo, to consolidate his regional rule. A castle like the legendary Heimji, the White Heron, was a masterclass in defensive psychology. Its approach was a deliberately confusing maze of winding paths, dead ends, and multiple fortified gates, all designed to slow, disorient, and break apart an attacking force long before they ever saw the main keep. The towering Tenchu itself, with its brilliant white plaster walls, served a dual purpose. Its striking beauty projected the daimyo's prestige, while the plaster provided a practical resistance to the fire arrows that were a common weapon of the era. But the castle was only the heart. The true body of this system was the town that grew in its shadow. The layout of a Jokamachi was a direct map of the social and military hierarchy. The most trusted, high-ranking samurai had their residences in the innermost rings, closest to the castle walls. Further out lived lower-ranking warriors, followed by the districts of merchants and artisans whose trades supplied the domain. Every street was a calculated part of the defense, narrow and twisting to prevent cavalry charges and to create easily blocked choke points. This was not an organic city, it was a machine for control. By compelling his entire military elite, his economic producers, and his administrative bureaucracy to live within this single, fortified complex, the daimyo achieved an unprecedented centralization of power. He could monitor his vassals, collect taxes efficiently, and mobilize his army with stunning speed. The profound security this system provided did more than prevent invasion. It created the conditions for a cultural and economic renaissance within the walls. The tea ceremony, no theater, and intricate craft traditions flourished in this stable environment, becoming markers of refined power, not just pastimes. The economic surplus generated by a secure, productive town funded the large, professional standing armies that would enforce peace for centuries under the Tokugawa shogunate. The castle-town system proved that the most effective defense could also be a perfect blueprint for governance, turning a daimyo's vulnerable domain into a self-contained, resilient, and potent regional state that drew its strength from the absolute order of its own streets. While Japan's daimyo consolidated power through rigid social grids, a different kind of planned community was taking shape on the other side of the world, one born not from feudal ambition but from a desperate need for sanctuary. In the remote frontier between Spanish and Portuguese territories in South America, Guarani communities faced a relentless threat: bands of armed slave raiders known as bandeirantes who swept through the jungle to capture indigenous people for forced labor. Into this landscape of vulnerability stepped Jesuit missionaries with a radical architectural and social proposition: the fortified mission settlement, or Reducción. This was not a colonial fortress imposing foreign rule, but a collaborative defensive system designed to create a shield of civilization where none existed. The layout was a masterstroke of communal planning. Each Reducción was built around a vast central plaza, flanked by a monumental church, workshops, schools, and orderly rows of housing, all arranged in a precise grid. This geometric order was then encircled by a strong defensive perimeter, a wall of timber or earthworks, often situated on a bluff overlooking a river for both protection and transport. The design served a clear dual purpose. The open plaza fostered a shared public life and allowed for rapid mustering of defenders, while the encompassing wall created a clear, defensible boundary against the chaos beyond. Security here was the prerequisite for everything else. Within those walls, the Guarani, guided by the Jesuits, built a society of startling self-sufficiency and sophistication. They mastered advanced metallurgy in mission forges, producing not just tools but also firearms. They established highly productive farms and ranches, and their workshops wove cotton textiles of such quality they became valued trade goods across the continent. The most famous export was yerba mate, a stimulating tea leaf cultivated in mission plantations, which generated substantial wealth. This economic engine was protected by a well-drilled indigenous militia, equipped with those mission-made muskets and cannons, a force capable of repelling bandeirante attacks. The Reducción system transformed scattered hunter-gatherer groups into cohesive, politically autonomous city-states. They had their own cabildos or town councils, composed of Guarani leaders who managed daily affairs and justice. For nearly 150 years, this network of some 30 missions thrived as a unique, semi-independent republic within the colonial world, a testament to what could be built when security enabled cultural synthesis and economic innovation. Their very success, however, sowed the seeds of their undoing. The wealth and power of these missions, and their resistance to using indigenous labor for external colonial profit, eventually became a threat in the eyes of the Spanish and Portuguese crowns. The communities forged in defense were ultimately dismantled by the very colonial systems they had learned to navigate, a poignant reminder that a defensive architecture can create a powerful and resilient society, but that the walls which protect a dream can also make it a target. The Reducción missions were a testament to what security could build, but they also revealed a stark truth that a fortress can become an island, and islands are often swallowed by the tides of greater empires. Yet the drive to carve out a secure foothold in a new and perilous world is a story told across continents. On the rocky shores and deep forests of 17th century North America, English colonists faced a vulnerability so profound it shaped their architecture down to the very floorboards of their homes. They arrived not as an imperial army, but as scattered groups of farmers, traders, and families, their settlements little more than clearings in a vast, unfamiliar land. The European Bastion fort, that masterpiece of stone geometry, was a technology they simply could not replicate here. Stone was scarce, time was shorter, and the threat was immediate. So they adapted, creating a defensive system born of necessity and local materials, the wooden garrison. This was defense democratized and brought home. In towns like Deerfield or along the main frontier, the garrison house was not a separate military structure, but a fortified homestead. ordinary family dwellings were built with strategic overhangs where the second floor projected out over the first. These garrison overhangs were pierced with loopholes, allowing those inside to fire down directly on anyone trying to breach the door or set the walls ablaze. Neighbors would agree on a central, strongest house to serve as a communal refuge, its timbers extra thick, its windows mere slits. When alarm came, the entire community would funnel into this one hardened shell, turning a domestic space into a citadel. On a larger scale, entire villages like those around early Bastion or Plymouth were encircled by tall palisades of sharpened timber logs with flanking blockhouses at the corners. These blockhouses were simple yet brutally effective, their second stories angled so musket fire could sweep the length of the wall, preventing attackers from scaling it. Fort William Henry, though later rebuilt in stone, began as this same logic writ large, a wooden star fort asserting a fragile claim on a contested coastline. This integrated system, where every home was a potential strongpoint and every town a compound, did more than just repel raids. It fundamentally structured colonial society. The constant, shared necessity of defense fostered a culture of communal obligation and local militia organization. Every able-bodied man was part of the watch, and drilling was a routine part of life. This security, however tense and imperfect, created the stable conditions necessary for the colonies to take root and grow. Farmers could tend fields within sight of the stockade, knowing the alarm would sound in time. Merchants could warehouse goods. Town meetings could plan not just for the next harvest, but for the next generation. The safety behind those timber walls allowed for the accumulation of agricultural surplus and the growth of mercantile networks along the coast. This accumulating wealth and organized manpower transformed the colonies from a collection of scared outposts into a coherent regional force. Historians point to conflicts like the French and Indian Wars, where the once vulnerable New England colonies, now consolidated and resource-rich, could raise and supply formidable provincial armies to project power deep into the continent alongside British regulars. The wooden garrison and the stockaded town were not symbols of weakness, but the essential scaffolding. They were the practical, everyday architecture that turned survival into settlement, and settlement into a power capable of shaping the destiny of a continent. This humble wooden wall raises a final, intriguing question. If such basic adaptations could forge nations, what happens when the very concept of a wall becomes obsolete? When the frontier is not a forest or a desert, but the open sky itself. The wooden stockades' claim upon the land was a declaration of presence, but to endure for centuries, a fortress must become part of the people's daily breath. In the thin, cool air of the Ethiopian highlands, where jagged peaks and deep gorges carved the landscape, survival demanded a different kind of integration. Here, vulnerable farming communities perfected a system where defense was not a communal refuge you ran to, but the very walls you lived within. This was the architecture of the Jera, sometimes called the Ambassador House, a residential stone tower that transformed every family homestead into a citadel. Scattered across the slopes of a village, these structures rose 3 or 4 stories tall, built from the dark, volcanic rock of the mountains themselves. Their design followed a stark, practical logic. The ground floor, with a single, narrow entrance, sheltered the family's most vital wealth, their livestock. Above, the living quarters ascended, but they could only be reached by a single, removable wooden ladder. In peaceful times, the ladder connected the family to their animals and their fields. But when the watchman's call echoed across the ridges, signaling a raid, the rhythm of life reversed in an instant. The ladder was pulled up, the small ground entrance blocked from within, and the stone tower became an impassable vertical stronghold. An attacking force, perhaps a rival clan or a marauding band, would find itself in a village of silent, impregnable stones. They could not capture the people who watched safely from slit windows above. They could not easily seize the grain stores often kept on the upper floors, and they certainly could not steal the livestock trapped behind fortified walls below. This decentralized defense meant there was no central prize to capture, no single gate to storm. A raid became a futile, exhausting exercise, as each juror had to be reduced individually, a costly and time-consuming effort for little reward. Historians of the region point to this architectural innovation as a cornerstone of enduring power. By securing the individual peasant household, the juror system protected the entire agricultural foundation of the highland kingdoms. Farmers could tend their terraced fields of teff and barley with the confidence that their families and harvests had a sanctuary mere steps away. This stability produced the consistent food surplus that fed the courts and, crucially, financed the professional armies of medieval empires like the Solomonic dynasty. The legendary rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, those miracles of faith carved downward into living stone, were projects that required decades of secure, organized labor and vast resources, a luxury only possible because the productive countryside was secured by 1,000 silent towers. The juror did not just defend a village, it defended the very possibility of civilization in a rugged land, proving that when security is woven into the fabric of every home, it creates a resilience so deep it can anchor kingdoms and inspire monuments for 1,000 years. Stone towers rooted a community to its mountain, but what if your power is new, your people are few, and the very ground you stand on is borrowed? The Normans, fresh from their conquest of England in 1066, faced this exact dilemma. William the Conqueror now held a kingdom, but it was a kingdom of sullen, resentful people who vastly outnumbered his own Norman knights and soldiers. His solution was not to build for the ages, but to build for tomorrow, deploying a system of such brutal efficiency it became the blueprint for colonizing an entire nation, the Motte and Bailey Castle. This was architecture as a statement of immediate, overwhelming presence. Its design was elegantly simple, a lesson in applied intimidation. Workers would dig a deep, circular ditch, piling the earth into a high, steep-sided mound, the motte. At its summit, they erected a sturdy wooden tower, a watchtower and final stronghold. Beside the mound, they enclosed a larger area, the bailey, with another ditch and a tall palisade of sharpened logs. Inside this bailey were barracks, stables, workshops, and storehouses. The entire complex could be constructed in a matter of weeks by a forced labor crew of local Anglo-Saxons, a constant, humiliating reminder of the new order. The genius was in its scalability and speed. William and his barons did not build a dozen grand fortresses. They built hundreds of these wooden sentinels, planting them at every strategic river crossing, on every old Roman road, and outside the gates of every major Anglo-Saxon town. They created a visible, suffocating network of control. From the wooden tower on the motte, a handful of Norman men-at-arms could survey the countryside for miles. Their sightlines were their authority. The message to the local population was unmistakable. Resistance is futile, for we see everything and we are everywhere. But these castles were far more than just watchful eyes. They were the active instruments of a new feudal system. The bailey served as a secure base for mounted knights to launch patrols, to collect taxes and tributes, and to enforce Norman law. It was a customs house, a courthouse, and a barracks all in one. A rebellious then or a defiant village would find not a distant king to appeal to, but a local Norman lord in a wooden fortress, with the men and the means to crush dissent before it could spread. This system allowed a tiny foreign elite, perhaps numbering only in the thousands, to administer and pacify a country of over 1 million people. The motte and bailey transformed vulnerable Norman footholds into unshakable nodes of power. They were the physical seeds from which the entire Norman kingdom grew, the secure points from which the landscape was surveyed, divided, and ruled. They proved that dominion could be built not from immortal stone, but from packed earth and timber, provided it was deployed quickly, systematically, and without mercy. This relentless logic of rapid, scalable fortification raises a final, modern question: when the landscape to be secured is not a physical territory at all, but the invisible, ever-shifting terrain of information and perception, what new form must defensive architecture take? The Mott and Bailey's wooden towers were a declaration of raw, immediate control, but 5,000 years earlier and half a world away, a civilization had already perfected a far more subtle and profound form of security. In the fertile floodplain of the Indus River, the great city of Mohenjo-Daro did not merely add defenses to its streets, it wove security directly into the blueprint of urban life itself. This was not a fortress city, it was a city as a fortress, engineered from the ground up to turn a vulnerable riverbank settlement into an unshakable hub of regional power. The first and most brilliant line of defense was not against human enemies, but against the river that gave them life. The entire city was constructed upon colossal artificial platforms of mud brick, raising it high above the annual floodwaters. This was not a simple embankment, but a foundational act of environmental defiance that guaranteed the city's survival year after year, protecting its granaries, its workshops, and its homes from nature's most predictable threat. Upon this secure base rose the city's most striking feature, a towering, fortified citadel complex built on an even higher mound of baked brick. This elevated acropolis, overlooking the orderly grid of the lower town, housed the city's most important public structures, granaries, and a great bath believed to be used for ritual purification. Its position was both practical and symbolic, a place of refuge and authority that could be defended independently if needed. But the true genius of Mohenjo-Daro's defensive system was in its everyday design. The lower city was laid out in a precise north-south grid of wide main streets, intersected by smaller lanes. This geometric order was revolutionary. For citizens, it created efficient pathways for daily life, but for defenders, it offered clear, unobstructed lines of sight and rapid avenues to move forces to any threatened point in the city. The uniformity is astonishing. Bricks were standardized to a perfect ratio, and houses, though varying in size, followed similar layouts, often featuring interior courtyards and windows facing inward, away from the streets. This suggests a powerful, centralized authority capable of organizing labor and enforcing building codes on a massive scale, the hallmark of a deeply secure and cohesive society. What did this profound, baked-in security allow them to achieve? The answer lies in the city's quiet marvels. Within those sturdy, standardized walls, they built the world's first known sophisticated urban sanitation system. Nearly every house had a bathing area and a latrine, connected by clay pipes to covered drains that ran beneath the streets, periodically cleared by removable brick lids. This concern for public health on a civic scale was unprecedented. The security from floods and conflict provided the stability necessary for extraordinary advancements in standardization, from weights and measures to pottery styles, which in turn facilitated vast trade networks. Archaeologists have found Indus Valley seals and goods in Mesopotamia, evidence of a commercial reach made possible by the secure, productive cities at home. Mohenjo-Daro's defensive architecture was not about towering walls or imposing gates. It was about creating a predictable, orderly, and clean environment where innovation and commerce could flourish uninterrupted. The power it generated was not expressed through conquest, but through influence, through the export of ideas, goods, and a model of urban living so advanced it would not be seen again for millennia. It proves that the most enduring defense may not shout from a rampart, but whisper from a well-planned street and a clean, flowing drain, providing the stable foundation upon which a civilization can quietly build its legacy. The silent, clean streets of Mohenjo-Daro remind us that the greatest walls are sometimes invisible, woven into the very logic of daily life. From the mythic Cyclopean blocks of Mycenae to the stark geometric precision of the Star Fort, these 15 systems whisper a universal truth across the centuries. True security is the fundamental prerequisite for power. They were never just walls of stone or rings of timber. They were profound psychological statements declaring a people's right to exist and thrive. They became relentless economic engines, securing the grain, gold, and trade routes that fueled ambition. And they served as indispensable political tools, allowing a scattered village or a foreign foothold to crystallize into a confident, prosperous, and expansionist center of gravity. Each design, born from the unique pressure of its environment, whether desert, jungle, mountain, or sea, showcases a breathtaking spectrum of human ingenuity. It is the story of turning a fundamental need for defense into an active platform for growth, influence, and an enduring legacy. The secured space behind a wall became a laboratory for law, a stage for culture, a vault for wealth, and a springboard for armies. These structures did not merely preserve what was, they actively created what could be. As we reflect on these earth and stone sentinels of history, their lessons echo into our own time. Consider the forms our own defensive architectures take today. They may be digital firewalls protecting streams of information, economic policies designed to shield a community from instability, or social frameworks built to foster trust and collective resilience. The core challenge remains unchanged. How do we build structures, tangible or intangible, that transform vulnerability into strength, that allow not just survival but flourishing? If you found this journey through the foundations of power fascinating, please subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries of our past. And we would love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments which of these defensive systems you believe was the most transformative in shaping the course of history.